This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All. This episode is brought to you by Horticouture, a conference exploring the influence of plants and gardens on the fashion world and featuring some of the industry's leading academics and influencers. For more information, visit the LCGD website, lcgd.org.uk, or their Eventbrite page. The conference will take place on the 9th of October, and tickets start at just £59, and the day will be streamed online as well as in person at Kew Gardens. In this episode, I'm speaking to award-winning writer Catherine Mack about getting a gardening book published. Catherine talks about why you might want to write a book, the process of getting your ideas onto paper, and how to get published. Plus, she addresses the most important issue of whether or not you'll make your fortune. If you've ever harboured dreams of writing a book, listen on and be inspired by Catherine's advice and encouragement.
Because it might be interesting, because I guess there's two reasons for me chatting, as well as you want me to talk about being a writer, but because I'm crowdfunding my book, I want to try and get awareness around it for that. But also, I've still got about 10 interviews to do. And I'm trying to find a really diverse mix of people to feature in the book, because there's such a sort of, cliched view that allotmenteers are all 60-year-olds white men, basically. And of course, that's not the case at all. There's lots of much younger people and people of all sort of racial mix and, backgrounds. And needs as well, in terms of like mental health and all sorts. So I'm trying to get a really diverse range of people to interview. And so I'm putting the word around about that. And, geographically as well. Obviously, I want to try and cover the country. And I'm really pleased that I just got somebody in Belfast, which is my original hometown, an allotment right in the heart of the city, sort of on the border between Catholic and Protestant areas of Belfast. So I think there'll be some really interesting stories to tell.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it sounds amazing. So while we're talking about your book, do you want to give people a little bit of background about it?
Yeah, sure. So it is called The Allotmentears, and it's basically that, really. It's going to be 25 profiles of allotmenteers from all around the country. And the reason I decided to write it was that I don't actually have an allotment, but I spend a lot of time at a friend's allotment, and we're always sort of chatting about different people who are there, and how sometimes you don't see them for a while, and you don't really know where they are, because everyone's quite private about their lives and allotments. And I thought, gosh, it'd be really nice to write a piece about, or to write a book about, what allotments mean to people and what their stories are. And I just presumed it would have been written, but it doesn't actually exist. So I went on some Facebook groups for allotments and reached out and said I was really interested in talking to some people about their stories and what allotments mean to them. And some incredible people have come back to me. I just recently interviewed and wrote up the story of a South African former soldier, but he served in the British Army, and he has very serious PTSD, and he's had to retire early, and his allotment has basically just saved him. Just super healing for all the trauma he's gone through. So although not all the stories are about sort of mental health, people who are talking to me are very open about just how much growing is helping them. Yeah, it's really interesting, and people are incredibly open and happy to talk about just how their allotment has sort of, I don't want to say changed their life, but has had a huge impact on their life. It's just this really very moving experience. I feel very honoured to talk to them, and also because I don't have an allotment, I feel like I'm getting a sort of view onto a secret world, which feels like quite a privilege. So I didn't really realise just how private people like to be on their allotments. I know a lot of people, quite a lot of people do go for their social life as well and see other people, but I think a lot of people go to get that sort of solitude and quiet and switch off from the digital world. And yeah, so it just basically feels like an honour being let in the gate.
So that's interesting because you came at that from your involvement with allotments, albeit as a kind of a non-participant. And I was going to ask you the question, which actually kind of ties into that. What is a good reason for writing a book?
Well, it's a good reason for writing a book. I think, well, I'm actually a travel writer. That's what I do normally, and I specialise in writing about sustainability. And I think that definitely having an area that you were very passionate about. I mean, it's a well-known phrase: write what you know about, and that's definitely true. But also write what moves you and what you really believe in. And so people's journeys are what interests me, people's stories and their journeys. And although my wings have been clipped during the pandemic, obviously there's no travel writing going on and no travel going on, just still being able to talk to people about these journeys that they go on with growing and sort of putting shape in an allotment is sort of almost as interesting to me. But yeah, so having that, writing about something that's that you're really passionate about, and that you're going to want to get up in the morning at 7 and just start writing for 3 or 4 hours. You're going to have to want to do it. And
discipline, I imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as disciplined as I should be. I think that a lot of writers talk about how they get up at 5 and they write for 5 hours and they don't take a break. I'm not like that, really. I'll really just go at it for 2 or 3 hours and then take a break and go for a walk and clear my head and then come back and reread it and see how it's doing. But to be honest, this book, I guess, is not like a novel. The words are coming from the people I'm interviewing, and then all I have to do is craft those words really into something that's that people are going to engage with immediately. It's not just a series of questions and answers. They're going to be nice, hopefully short stories. So I don't know. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it definitely does. And I suppose the flip side of that is, how do you know whether what you're writing is going to be of interest to readers?
Well, I think first of all, it's definitely worth checking what's out there, because basically there's no point in contacting a publisher until, if there are 10 books on that subject, just forget it. It's just, you're not going to, unless it's really, really different, I don't think you're going to have much joy unless you want to self-publish, which is an option. But I would say really get guidance from publishers. They know what they're talking about, especially, and find a publisher that's a specialist in your area. So there are a lot of publishers who not a lot, but there are fewer publishers in the UK who specialise in nature writing, obviously travel writing. You're not really going to go to a publisher who just does fiction to write a book about landscapes, for example.
Yeah. So you mentioned 2 options there, self-publishing and working with a publisher. Are they your 2 main options if you're looking to get published?
Yes, they are really. You can also, you can publish online. You can use a blog to just publish. That's also very popular. And of course, now there are a lot of people doing that because if they've got a very good network of social media, they can just get a lot of traffic to their blog. And then there are lots of ways in which you can monetize your blog. But there's a lot of competition for that. And at the end of the day, I'm personally a bit of a fan of an old-fashioned book, and I'm glad to see that the publishing industry is actually, I believe, it's on the up again. People are going back to reading books, and they want to switch off their screens and go back to physical books. The publisher that I'm working with on this book, they're called Unbound, and they're a bit different. They fall between those 2 options, really. So, and in fact, they set up 10 years ago really for that reason, because they wanted to publish people who wouldn't get into the normal traditional publishing route. So, if, for example, if you were told by a publisher, oh, that's a bit niche, we don't think that would really work. We wouldn't sell enough. It's possible that Unbound, if it's a good enough idea, we'll go with it, because they think outside the niche, and that's exactly what they did with this book. And I'd already been told by a couple of publishers that they thought it was a bit niche, and I sort of thought, I don't know how a book about allotments can be niche.
No, doesn't sound it.
There's so many people out there, who like to read about people's stories, but also who are allotmenteers. And Unbound got that immediately. But the reason they're a bit different is that they also crowdfund their books. So although it's not self-publishing, they handle all the publishing themselves, and they have a big marketing machine behind them, and they really know the industry. It was set up by expert, super experienced publishers, as I said, 10 years ago, so that they really know what they're doing. But they put it out for crowdfunding, and then if you get enough people to believe in your project, then it gets published, basically. And in order to crowdfund it, you basically just sort of pledge for the book. You might go and pledge 20 quid, and then you'll get a signed copy of the book when it's published. Yeah, but they're a really interesting model, I think. I mean, I haven't worked with them before, but they're just so encouraging to work with, because they don't feel like they don't try to put you into what's the word? I can't think what the word is, but they don't sort of try to squeeze you into a category. They'll let you write what you want to write about if they believe in it. So that's quite liberating.
Yeah, I bet. So if you wanted to, well, I'm guessing there's going to be the same sort of formula, whether you approach a publisher or whether you're crowdfunding or whether you're going with someone like Unbound. I'm guessing you need to have some sort of outline to approach them with. Is that right?
Yeah, you do. What I did was I prepared the norm, I think, for non-fiction is to have 4 or 5 chapters written. So in my case, I had 5 interviews written up, and then a few sort of sample photographs, and also a synopsis of what the book was about, who you think it will appeal to. So you really have to have that as a minimum. If you're writing fiction, I think most publishers actually want to see a full manuscript. So it's a lot of work before you'll start seeing, obviously, any money. That's why I said you have to really want to do it. But so for fiction, I think they more or less want to see a first draft, what they call a full manuscript, and for non-fiction, usually 4 or 5 chapters. Yeah. But every publisher normally has what they call their submission guidelines on their website. So if you are interested in writing a book, just the best thing to do really is go to go to a bookshop, look at some of the books that you really like that are maybe in the area that you want to write about, see who publishes it, and then go to their website and see if they have submission guidelines. And then start from there. The other option is that you can not go to a publisher directly, but you can try and get yourself a literary agent. But I think that's usually quite tricky unless you've got a little bit of writing experience already.
And would you need photographs, for example, as well, to go along with it?
So with mine I did, because it was quite easy. I just I got shots of a couple of the people I'd interviewed, but also I had a vision of. I had a vision. Sounds a bit extreme, but I had a picture of how I wanted the portraits to be in the book. It was quite sort of just straight up portraits of these people, because I think, I love their faces, and I wanted to catch their love of nature in their face, and the interesting sort of story behind their eyes. So for me, I didn't want pictures of vegetables. I really wanted the people, because ultimately it's a book about people more than obviously how to grow vegetables.
And that's quite a interesting thought as well. If you were going through a traditional publisher, I'm assuming they would have someone who'd lay the book out. If you were going down the self-published route, or crowdfunding, that kind of thing, do you need to employ someone to lay the book out for you, or is it possible that could happen?
They're handling all of that. They do all of that. In my case, Unbound, they handle all of that, and they suggest the design, and you obviously have total approval on it, and they came up with they've designed a beautiful cover for it, and they recommended, paperback over hardback. So that's why that sort of stuff is so much easier when you do go with an experienced publisher, because it's hard enough writing a book, but to take all those decisions on your own as well is really tough.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously there's an outlay in terms of your time. When you start, you have to bring it all together. Would it cost you anything else, or should it cost you anything else initially?
Not with the publisher, no, absolutely. It's all time, really. And for me, travel expenses, because although I have been interviewing quite a lot of people on Zoom, but some travel expenses while I go and meet people. But if you're not writing a book that involves meeting lots of people, you shouldn't have too many of those. And then if you do need photography, there'll be a photography budget. But I would warn people that in publishing, all those things are very low.
Right.
It's just, unless you're a writer who's going in for your second or third book deal, you're dealing with small budgets. So I'm certainly not going to make a fortune from a book about Allotmentears, but I just really wanted to write it, and I'm really enjoying it, and I hope it brings pleasure to people when it's done, and that's all I wanted out of it. Really, I was missing writing so much in lockdown because I couldn't travel, so I just loved the idea that I was chatting with other people about these journeys that they're making. Of course, I'm also now a complete convert, and I'm going to get an allotment.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. You'll love it, I'm sure.
Sure I will. I'm certainly prepared for all the hard work, because people are telling me all the stories about that.
You've heard some cautionary tales
about that.
So talking about the finances, anyone who's got dreams of making their fortune writing a book, is that likely to happen, or does it depend on circumstances? I mean,
I'd say it's very unlikely. I think you're really in the minority. But I wouldn't discourage anyone from doing it. I really wouldn't, because also you just don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen with a book, especially fiction. Something just is in zeitgeist and it just works. So if you have it in you and you want to write it, just write it, I'd say. But if you really need that money to put food on the table for your kids, no, you need, I have a day job, you do need an income, but I'm not going to say that you're not going to make loads of money, because you just never know.
No.
I think that's mostly with fiction, that happens, but, because suddenly people just love it and it takes off, and suddenly you're getting film rights and all sorts. And that does happen to people, which is incredibly exciting. But I wouldn't set out with the plan of that happening.
No, something that is not maybe the best work of fiction ever, something like 50 Shades of Grey, probably exceeded all expectations.
Sally Rooney, I don't know if you know Normal People. She's from my country of Ireland, and she's just a phenomenon. She wrote Normal People, and I think I don't know if she's on her third or fourth novel now, and she's just became an overnight sensation. And I'm sure lots of people didn't predict it, but it just happened, which is fantastic. And so it really does happen. But at the same time, the reality is, if you submit a manuscript to a publisher, they'll nearly always tell you that they're not going to get back to you for at least 10 to 12 weeks. That's sort of the norm. So that gives you an idea of just how many manuscripts they're reading. They have so many that are sent in, and they do say, we'll read them all. But yeah, there's a lot of people trying to do it, and it's amazing, though. It is a great feeling. This one isn't published yet, obviously, because I'm still at the crowdfunding stage. But I had a book written about Ireland, actually, about 8 years ago, about sustainable travel in Ireland. I just did that with a small independent publisher, and we had about 8,000 or 9,000 books published which was a pretty small book run. But it felt fantastic once I got it. It was just, I'm still really proud of it. And I'd love to do an updated version, and maybe I will. But it felt really good to do it. So I would never discourage anyone from doing it. One other thing I would suggest is do join a writing group, or just team up with another writer who can support you. It's great to have someone who can support you, and also there are incredible evening classes out there. If you've got a day job, there are lots of classes that you can join, especially on Zoom and stuff. So I would definitely get some guidance and some support, which can be quite scary to do, because I think it's quite difficult for a lot of people to share what they've written. They feel shy or vulnerable about it, but I think it's really worth trying to find a group just to support you, or a class, where you can up your skills as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You mentioned about kind of the print runs and thinking in terms of the amount of copies that you sell. How many would you need to sell in order to kind of, for it to be deemed a success? Does it depend on where your break-even point is, or, the kind of niche that you're writing in?
Yeah, I don't know. I think probably does. I'm sure it really depends on the category that you're writing in. Something like a novel, I'm sure it's tens of thousands. I've no idea really, but I don't know the answer to that question. I guess it's just it depends on the production costs of your book, how many you need to sell, and whether you're going to break even. Again, that's why it's good going with a publisher who's experienced, because they know, they want to make money too, so that they'll know how to set the budgets to then at least get back some of the costs. And then obviously, hopefully you'll get paid some royalties, and that's how you'll get your money.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, people talk about advances. Is that kind of unusual?
I think advances are pretty rare unless you're already published. If you're already a published author, and people and publishers have seen that you're experienced, then you're more likely to get a literary agent, and they will then negotiate in advance for you. But I think they're pretty rare. I did get one for the one on Ireland, but we're talking, it was quite a long time ago. We're talking maybe a couple of £1,000 or something, to cover me for, 6 months basically of writing. And I was traveling quite a lot for that. So, yeah. I mean, I really got that because I was going to be traveling, so I needed some money up front. But I think they're pretty rare, to be honest. Yeah, but unless you have already been published.
Yeah. So while I've got you, I can't resist asking, because you've got such a wealth of experience. If somebody thought, maybe I don't have a book in me, but I do have perhaps some articles, is it a completely different ballgame to pitch to magazines?
Yes, it is. It really is. It depends. I mean, obviously, it really depends on the area that you're working in. But travel is my main area, and so what you try and do is just get as many editors' names as you can. First of all, get to know all the publications, whether they're online or in print. I mean, they're all online now, but you need to get to know the editors of that, of the area that you're writing about. So whoever the gardening area editor is, or maybe features or lifestyles editor, and then the most important thing is to read up what they've already published and see, because if, for example, somebody wants to write, let's say I want to write an article about hiking holiday in Croatia, an editor at, say, The Telegraph or The Guardian, if I pitched that to them and 2 months ago, even 6-8 months ago, they had already published an article on hiking in Croatia, they'd be really fed up if I pitch that to them, because they think, well, you haven't read what we're doing. So it's important to get to know what they're doing and what they haven't done. And then if they haven't done it, then just send them an email saying, this is my idea. And it doesn't have to be the full article. You can just send a couple of paragraphs about what you want to write about, This is the angle that you'll take. Would you be interested in commissioning it? Simple as that. 9 out of 10 times, I'm afraid they don't get back to you. But it's worth chasing. If you really think it's an interesting idea and you think it's the right publication and that they've never written about it, just keep going. And if that doesn't work, there is also no harm in also writing the whole article and sending it to them and going, this is, I've written it, here it is, it's ready to go. If you'd like it, I'd love you to have it. And also give them the impression that you want to give it to them as an exclusive. So, because they like that. The other thing about that is if I can't publish the same article in lots of papers. So if I do that hiking holiday in Croatia and I write a nice article about it, I can't send it to The Guardian and The Times and wherever, not as a finished article, because they wouldn't want anyone else to have it published. Mm-hmm. But what you can do is still write about the hiking trip in Croatia or whatever you want to write about it. You just rewrite it with a slightly different angle and slightly different wording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, that is, again, very useful. Thank you for that. So before I let you go, can you tell people if they are interested in helping you get your book off the ground, what can they do?
Oh, thanks. They can just go on to Unbound. And I think anyone will be interested to see the sort of work they're doing anyway, because there's just some fantastic and a really eclectic range of books. But if you go on Unbound and just in the search button put Allotmentears, you'll find it, and then you can just pledge. And you can pledge, I think, anything from £20 up to a ridiculous amount of money. There are all sorts of different packages that you can pledge on. So you can just pledge for the actual book with a signed copy, or you can get a hamper with some allotment goodies in it, plus the book, of course. Or you can actually choose to have your own story featured in the book if you want to. But actually, if you want to have your story featured in the book and you think you have an interesting story to tell, just get in touch with me anyway, because I've still got some spaces. So, but yeah, just go on Unbound and look up the Allotmentears.
Thank you very much to Catherine. I hope you've been inspired to pen your masterpiece. Thanks to you for listening, and thank you to those of you who recently reviewed the podcast and shared episodes on social media. That said, it was a minuscule percentage of the people who listen that did so. So please do help me out and rate and review and share the podcast as much as you can. Thank you. Now here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about a butterfly that seems to have been out in profusion this summer.
One of the 59 species of butterfly that breed in Britain is the red admiral. A stunning butterfly with black wings displaying orange bands and white spots. And it's a common visitor to our gardens during spring and again in late summer. Despite being referred to as a resident species though, the red admiral is actually a migrant butterfly that historically has not been able to survive through a traditional British winter. And so each spring, mated females from Central Europe have flown to Britain to lay their eggs. Eggs that then produce the summer generation of red admirals that we so commonly see in our gardens. Unlike other migrant butterflies though, whose numbers can dramatically fluctuate from year to year, the red admiral consistently appears in plentiful numbers and reliably appears in all habitats throughout Britain every year. So why has this butterfly become so successful here? Well, it's really down to a few simple behavioural characteristics that increase the survival rate of its caterpillars and their development into adults. Primarily, their eggs are laid on stinging nettles, a host plant that most herbivorous animals avoid, and they're often laid just one per plant to minimise egg predation. When these hatch, the little caterpillars then fold the edges of the leaves together to create a protective tent, only emerging to feed or to create a larger tent as they grow bigger. Then, when fully grown, the caterpillars pull several leaves together to form a chamber within which they pupate. Again, out of sight and protected from predators. By midsummer, the adult red admirals will begin hatching and will often be found feeding on nectar-rich flowers such as buddleia and ivy, then into autumn on overripe blackberries and plums. And this is really where their annual cycle has ended in Britain, because as our day lengths shorten and temperatures fall, the red admirals don't journey back to a warmer climate, and neither do they go into hibernation. But instead, they just rest in sheltered locations, venturing out to feed on warmer days, but inevitably, at some time, succumbing to the cold. However, the climate is changing, and many sightings of red admirals on the wing across Britain have been reported during the recent mild winters. The possibility clearly exists now that they might be able to survive long enough to lay their eggs on the springtime nettles, and so finally become a genuine British resident butterfly species.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.